I stood in Venice on the Bridge of Sighs, a palace and a prison on each hand. I saw from out the wave her structures rise as from the stroke of the enchanter's wand. 1,000 years their cloudy wings expand around me. A dying glory smiles o'er the far times when many a subject land looked to the winged lion's marble piles where Venice sat in state, throned on her 100 isles.
George Lord Byron, the English poet, wrote those words about the city nearest to his heart. It could only be but one. There is no other like it. Nothing to equal it in all the world. None but Venice, Queen of the Adriatic. From the 9th to the 13th century, Venice was rich beyond belief. But by Byron's day, 150 years ago, Venice had settled smilingly into a dying glory. Today, the palazzos that line her grand canal are shabbier still, their footings more decayed. Each day, more plaster dust circles the base of the multitude of sculptures that festoon the city. Each year, the 700,000 cypress piles on which this fairyland is built sink another inch into the ocean. Yet for all her decay, Venice is more beautiful than ever. A dusty diamond tiara, an international treasure, a magnet for all the lovers, historians, scholars, and pleasure seekers of this world.
I count only the sunny hours, is the motto of a sundial in Venice. There is a softness and a harmony in the words and in the thought unparalleled.
The English essayist, William Hazlitt, had the right idea. You can't get it in a day. What the Venetians call far niente, idleness. But if you can stay a while, you will soon feel the essence of Venice ooze into you. The lack of pressure that begins with the fact that there's no place to go. Nothing to do except relax in a gondola, sip coffee at an outdoor cafe, or window shop in the merceria you enter under the clock tower. Give yourself up to that relaxation and you will find fulfillment and a satisfaction that there is no car to park, no taxi to catch, not even a bicycle to bother with. In Venice, you walk. You breathe, you think, you dream. You gossip with strangers. Explore quaint squares. Float idly down a narrow canal. Stroll across a tiny bridge. Study a piece of sculpture tucked into a niche. Watch the statues of the Moors as they hammer out each idle hour atop the clock tower. Venice is built on 117 islands. It has 150 canals and 400 bridges. It was founded in 811 AD. In 823, the bones of St. Mark the Evangelist were brought from Alexandria. His symbol is the winged lion, and he became the protector of the town. Venice was an independent republic under the rule of a doge, a name derived from the Latin word for leader, dux. The hub of public life is the Piazza San Marco, St. Mark's Square, where tourists and citizens alike sit in its famous outdoor cafes and watch the passers-by. Surrounding St. Mark's Square, which the English art critic John Ruskin called the most beautiful room in Europe, are buildings from many periods and styles, reflecting the history of the city. The domed Church of St. Mark and the Campanile were begun in 912 AD. 1,000 years later, in 1902, the bell tower buckled and collapsed without killing a soul. When it was restored, a decade afterwards, the original bell, Venice's oldest, was once more hung in the belfry. The Doge's Palace, seat of the government, is mainly 14th century Gothic. The Library of St. Mark was constructed by the great Venetian architect Jacopo Sansovino in 1536. But it is the Church of St. Mark's itself, more than any of the buildings that surround the square, which proclaims Venice the joining place, the link between East and West. This golden basilica, a jeweled rainbow of mosaics, was begun in the 10th century and is the product of centuries of community effort. Indeed, an early law required every Venetian ship to bring back materials for the construction or decoration of the church. As a result, fragments from every Mediterranean country can be found somewhere in its fabric. From the 4 bronze Roman horses of the 1st century AD that stand over the central portal, to the Alexandrian polychrome marble columns and Greek alabaster windows. These 4 bronze horses, in the Hellenic style, are perceived by everyone as one of the great treasures of the world. They were taken from Constantinople during the Crusades. For the Venetians, the Crusades were as much a commercial as a religious enterprise. And set in their present place of honor in 1204 by the leader of that crusade, the Doge Dandolo. When Napoleon's soldiers marched into Venice in 1797, the first items they grabbed were the 4 bronze horses, which they immediately shipped home to Paris. These were returned to their present site atop the Golden Basilica after Napoleon met his Waterloo. On the crest of the central gable of the church is the winged lion of St. Mark, one of the 4 beasts that symbolize the evangelists, placed here to honor him as the city's patron saint. At the lateral doorways, mosaics made up of thousands upon thousands of precious and semi-precious stones depict the translation of the body of St. Mark. Directly over the central portal is a particularly grand mosaic of the resurrection of Christ. The Doge's Palace is a bizarre, half Oriental, half Gothic town hall, rising in 2 stories of open-painted arches, surmounted by a 3rd story, much lauded and admired for its diamond-shaped design in bright pink marble tiling. The ground floor gallery is supported by 36 columns with exquisite capitals representing virtues, vices, months and trades. The open upper gallery has 71 columns surmounted by marble eyes. Inside the courtyard, a splendid example of the Renaissance style, is the famous Giant's Stairway. With the figures of Mars, the god of war, and Neptune, god of the sea, sculpted by Sansovino. One of the most unique features of St. Mark's Square is the clock tower, built at the end of the 15th century. The great clock face, in gold and enamel, bears the signs of the zodiac and the phases of the moon. Above the dial, and below the golden lion of St. Mark, resplendent against a decorated blue field, Roman and Arabic numerals show the hour. On top, the 2 famous bronze Moors have been striking the hour with heavy hammers for 500 years. Under the clock tower, one enters the Merceria, the shadowy walkway, lined with shops of every description. Rounding the corner of St. Mark's Square and facing the Doge's Palace is the Sansovino Library, remarkable both for its lavish architectural detail and because it houses a treasury of books left here by no less a person than the medieval poet Petrarch, together with other scholars and writers of the day. Why should this library be the recipient of their gifts? The answer is a practical one. In this watery city, the danger of fire in the Middle Ages was less than elsewhere. Sansovino's designs influenced Andrea Palladio, the greatest architect associated with the Venetian school. When advancing years curtailed Sansovino's activities, Palladio was called to Venice to construct several buildings. Among them, the church of San Giorgio Maggiore, begun in 1566 on the island of San Giorgio, facing the lagoon and St. Mark's Square. Palladio's severe, majestic, rectangular style spread far and wide until it became international, influencing none other than America's own Thomas Jefferson. Sansovino and Palladio dealt in clean design, the rich detailing never overpowering the strong lines. It remained for Baldassare Longhena, early in the 17th century, to break away from his predecessors and carry Venetian architecture over into the exuberant spirit of the Baroque. Best exemplified by the Church of Santa Maria della Salute. Here, nothing is in repose. Everything is restless, teeming with action. Santa Maria was built after an epidemic of plague. The Venetians vowed to build this church if the Holy Mother would take away the accursed sickness. When it was gone, the Venetians kept their promise with this splendid result. Hardly a poet, writer, artist or architect who has visited this fairy city in the last 400 years has failed to be affected by its special magic, or to translate that effect into his art. 400 years ago, Shakespeare wrote his dramatic tale of Antonio, a merchant of Venice, who borrowed from the moneylender Shylock. It is a true tale of Venice, and the merchants who invested fortunes in the cargoes brought back to make them rich. As Antonio approaches his shop, Shylock says,
"What news on the Rialto? Who is he comes here?"
Rialto means exchange or mart, and is named for the famed Rialto Bridge, built in Shakespeare's time and designed with a pronounced hump to allow an armed galley to pass under it. The centre, then and now, is lined with shops. Which one was Shylock's? Only your imagination can devise. As time passed, each succeeding artist or author portrayed Venice within a well-travelled tradition. Thomas Mann, in his masterful novella Death in Venice, writes of his aging protagonist, Aschenbach.
He thought of the melancholy and susceptible poet who had once seen the towers and turrets of his dreams rise out of the waves.
Mann doesn't name the poet. He knows that you, the reader, know it's Byron.
I loved her from my boyhood. She to me was a fairy city of the heart, rising like water columns from the sea. O Venice, Venice, when thy marble walls are level with the waters, there shall be a cry of nations o'er thy sunken halls.
Thus wrote the romantic Byron. Richard Wagner, the German composer, died in one of the palazzos that line the Grand Canal. So did the poet, Robert Browning. Thomas Mann's Aschenbach, who came to Venice by sea, saw
that landing place that takes the breath away. That amazing group of incredible structures the Republic set up to meet the awe-stretched eyes of the approaching seafarer. The airy splendor of the palace and the Bridge of Sighs. The columns of lion and saint on the shore. The glory of the projecting flank of the fairy temple. The vista of gateway and clock. Looking, he thought that to come to Venice by the station is like entering a palace by the back door. No one should approach save by the high seas as he was doing now, this most improbable of cities.
"There's not a second Venice in the world," so said Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Everyone with romance in his soul agrees. Byron and Mann certainly. Not to mention Goethe, Proust, Dickens, Longfellow, Stendhal, and Whistler. And in our time, Ernest Hemingway, Irving Wallace, Thornton Wilder. It never changes. It only decays a little, day by day. The coloured stucco of its palaces, lovely even in extreme dilapidation, chip away, chip away. Rose, tawny, mauve, melon. Thomas Mann notwithstanding, to arrive in Venice by rail, detrain in the dark station and emerge into the brilliant sunlight, The scene crammed with boats, boat hookmen, vendors of all kinds. To embark in a motor launch to your hotel is an unforgettable experience. One sweeps in the course of 5 minutes into the Grand Canal. The splendor of that great waterway, the sense of floating between marble palaces, fronted by striped poles, watery steps, some of them grand Renaissance classical edifices, some Byzantine, Oriental, right out of the Arabian Nights. Gondolas everywhere. Workboats. Vaporetti. Venice's answer to buses. All this disposes the mind at one and the same time to freedom, ease, and excitement.
Is there anyone but must repress a secret thrill on arriving in Venice for the first time, or returning there after a long absence and stepping into a Venetian gondola? That singular conveyance come down unchanged from ballad times, black as nothing else on earth. And has anyone remarked that the seats in such a bark, the armchair lacquered in black and dully black upholstered, is the softest, most luxurious, most relaxing seat in the world?
That was Mann's Aschenbach. Hemingway's Richard, the middle-aged colonel, and his young and beautiful Venetian princess Renata make love in a gondola.
They got down into the gondola, and there was the same magic as always of the light hull, and the sudden displacement that you made as the gondolier started to scull, laying her partly on her side so he would have more control.
Hemingway loved Venice, just like all his literary predecessors. But his circle of activities did not center around St. Mark's Square. Instead, Hemingway and his protagonist, Richard, stayed at an elegant hotel and spent all other waking hours either in aimless wandering, floating in a gondola, or in that newest but perhaps most famous of all Venetian landmarks, Harry's Bar. The founder, the late Giuseppe Cipriani, formerly a bartender at the Hotel Europa, opened for business in February 1931. Within a month, people checking into their hotels in Venice asked not where is San Marco, but where's Harry's Bar? Today, this small restaurant, perhaps the best known in the world, is run by Cipriani's son, Arrigo. Hemingway was the most interesting man I ever met, said the elder Cipriani a few years before he died. We always knew when he was in love and about to start a new adventure because he would shave off his beard, said Hemingway in his last novel, Across the River and Into the Trees.
Then he was pulling open the door of Harry's Bar, and he was inside, and he had made it again, and was home.
If Harry's Bar was life and breath to Hemingway, it was the crumbling palaces of the Grand Canal and the glories of St. Mark's Square that meant most to Henry James. In the Aspen Papers, the novella set in Venice, James writes,
"How charming, it's gray and pink," my companion exclaimed, and that is the most comprehensive description of it. It was not particularly old, only 2 or 3 centuries, and it had an air not so much of decay as of quiet discouragement, as if it had rather missed its career. but its wide front, with a stone balcony from end to end, was architectural enough with the aid of various pilasters and arches, and the stucco with which in the intervals it had long ago been endued was rosy in the April afternoon.
And of the Piazza San Marco, James wrote,
I sat in front of Florian's cafe, eating ices, listening to music, talking with acquaintances. The traveler will remember how the immense cluster of tables and little chairs stretches like a promontory into the smooth lake of the piazza. The whole place, all the voices and light footsteps on marble, is an open-air saloon, dedicated to cooling drinks and to a still finer digestion, that of the splendid impressions received during the day.
And what were then and are today those impressions? They are endless in number. A walk across the wooden Accademia Bridge to see the great art of Venice housed in that museum. A trip to the Curragh off St. Mark's Square to see the famous Courtesans of Venice by Carpaccio. A visit to that strange, forbidding Bridge of Sighs, so called because of the wailing of the prisoners who were conducted across it to their place of execution. Casanova was one of its most famous inmates. The Bridge of Sighs connects the Doge's palace with the prison from which there was no return. In Venice, all experience combines to delight the senses. It matters not whether it be the art that hangs in its museums or the food that is served in its restaurants, or the music played in its small, exquisite opera house, La Fenice.
Meanwhile, aren't we in Venice together? And what better place is there for the meeting of dear friends? See how it glows, how the sky and the sea and the rosy air and the marble of the palaces all shimmer and melt together.
This, then, is Venice. Robert Benchley, the American humorist, upon arriving in Venice, sent a desperate cable home.
Streets full of water. Please advise.
The advice should be quick in coming. Unpack. Stroll leisurely to Harry's or one of the cafes of San Marcos. Feed the pigeons. Set up your easel in front of the Golden Basilica. Glide in a gondola along a lustrous mother-of-pearl canal. Let go, and allow your soul to commune with Byron, James, Browning, and with all the 750,000 other visitors who come here every year. It never changes. It only decays a bit more day by day, and every day it sinks a bit further into the sea. Its paint-box palaces chip a bit more, none of this detracting from its enchantment the slightest bit. Nowhere is there anything like it. Nothing to equal its strange beauty. There is only one Venice, Queen of the Adriatic.